Hello and welcome to the first and possibly only video on my channel. For context about myself, I enjoyed the original game but still had major gripes with it, primarily the parkour and movement system. I'm also a massive fan of the movement in the Ezio games, as I believe that was the peak of the franchise, and all three are in my top 5 AC games, most likely due to the fact that I'm a stealth and parkour oriented player who doesn't care too much for open combat. Although I have said that, I'm still not great at it, as I've only recently been getting back into the series after avoiding it because of the RPG games. As such, I do apologise for the lackluster gameplay in the background, but I was just capturing footage of mostly my first attempts at any of these activities and quests. If you do want some proper footage from great players, I shall leave a few channels that I enjoy watching down in the description below. If you would also like to see better content from myself in which I focus on a specific gameplay type, please let me know. My thoughts going into this game was that it would feel neither better or worse overall than the original, but more of a sidestep from it. I was worried and cautious about combat, parkour and mission structure, but felt confident about naval content, world navigation and the overall exploration. I was actually looking forward to open combat, which is something that's never happened before. I will be splitting this video into 3 parts: the good, the bad and the ugly. I'll explain what I like, what I dislike and what I strongly dislike. I may also talk about things that I'm neutral about, that are in neither of the categories that I've mentioned above. I also haven't finished the game yet, so I may make another video once I'm done with it, just to add any new thoughts that I may have. The points that I mentioned won't be structured or ordered in any specific way, it's more so just me getting my thoughts out after about 20 hours of playtime. Let's begin with the good. Naval combat feels a lot more challenging and rewarding even on normal difficulty because it has a good level of challenge. The range of weapons, as well as their different use cases, are great, and they're distinct enough to where I find myself rotating between different weapon and ammo types to suit different situations. Being able to track your heated shots to damage more of the enemy ships is a great thing which I absolutely adore, and while I wish that we saw this on other ammo types, I also understand that they did this to differentiate it from the rest. As well as this, the sense of progression is extremely satisfying. Even after a couple of upgrades, I find myself going from being able to fight 1 ship at a time to being able to take out 3 or 4 ships. This is without needing to board or repair the trapdoor. This resulted in a more loot being gained overall due to the fact that I can now choose to send more ships to my fleet, or even open the captain's lockbox found on stronger ships as opposed to almost always having to repair my jackdaw. Outfits have had a visual upgrade and I find myself drawn to many more of them than I was in the OG game. Colours have been tweaked to be more pleasing to the eye, and the overall saturation increase has made a lot of boring outfits from the original game look much better. Combat is also satisfying, and once you're in flow state, it's very fun to take down multiple enemies while swiftly and smoothly chaining different moves together for a varied fighting style. Stealth generally feels good and smooth, with the different times of day having a noticeable impact on the techniques and tactics that you choose to employ, which means that you have to tailor your approach depending on when you infiltrate a location. Enemies are also pretty easy to get into advantageous positions due to how responsive they are, which means that you can adopt different styles of play to attack an area. Cities and towns feel lively and busy, with the denser number of NPCs making them feel like places in which people actually visit to trade or just to live there. There aren't too many NPCs to where you feel squashed or overwhelmed, it's just the right amount. As well as this, hearing them conversate and interact with each other lends itself more to the fact that they feel like real places with real people, not just a video game city with NPCs that are there for the sake of it. Enemy areas also feel different from each other to where it doesn't feel repetitive or tiresome, unlike the castles and shadows, as well as allowing you to choose the difficulty of the place you want to infiltrate. Sometimes I go into a small area to just test the limits of enemy detection and try different stealth techniques, which I then try to apply in larger areas with a higher number of enemies. Naval navigation feels great, and just like in cities, it feels like we're in a living world. Regular enemy battles and the threat of forts make you feel like you are in a place that you really don't belong, with forts feeling much more of a challenge and threat than they ever did before. Parkour feels solid and the best that we've had in years, with animation cancelling and camera relative parkour introducing a level of freedom and creative expression that we've not seen since pre-Origin AC titles. Animal hunting actually feels satisfying, and being able to engage in proper hunting techniques or a small battle adds some spice to the experience. While I didn't hate the original style with the QTEs, this new method is a little bit better in my opinion. The lack of loading screens and seamlessness of navigating the world makes the game feel much smoother and less of a hassle when you do decide to fast travel to an area or go to visit a store. Overall, there's less downtime, and that feels great because less loading screens means more playing time. Although this feels obvious, the graphics are absolutely gorgeous. No matter how strongly you feel about Ubisoft and the quality of their games, you can't deny that they always make beautiful looking worlds. Cities have been redesigned and expanded to create a more fulfilling and satisfying experience of navigating them, both on the rooftops and on the ground. The weather and atmosphere of the game is also amazing. I love how violent a storm can feel, or how rain can create realistic looking mist and fog in cities, which adds to the realism of having torrential downpour in a humid environment like the Caribbean. Sailing through a storm and seeing a lightning strike is jaw-droppingly beautiful. While I initially hated the rain and footage we got prior to launch, after they added the mist and fog, all my issues faded away. Linked to the previous point, I find it amazing how they simulate realistic puddles that don't vanish as soon as the rain does, but they slowly evaporate over the course of 1 to 2 days, which once again lends itself to the world feeling like a real environment. They have streamlined side activities by giving us far less collectibles in the game, which means that gathering chests and other items is not as tedious or boring if you're going for 100% completion. Harpooning is also a lot more challenging and makes the rewards feel much more satisfying, although I have seen other players express frustration about the activity. Another thing is that enemy types actually have noticeable gameplay effects, which means that you have to tailor your approach to how you combat enemies in order to be as effective, efficient, and fluid as possible. Both naval and ground combat feel very solid to engage in, and it means that you have to think a bit more about what you want to do. I love how you can still dispatch enemies as quickly as you could in the OG, but if you do want a more drawn out battle, you can opt to do so by not using takedowns. I occasionally find myself just spending a few minutes parrying and dodging a group of enemies. It's very satisfying to do and makes me feel like I'm in the Matrix. Another thing is that being able to manually aim rope darts is a great gameplay mechanic, and being able to get them earlier is such a good change. Loot not only being tied to activities is also a great thing. You can find loot from chests, which simply reduces the tedium of travelling everywhere to find stuff. I also like how outfits aren't just from the store or for crafting, we can get more of them via exploration. To anyone actually watching this, leave a comment with the word wolf, just so I know if you've gone this far. If you have, I'm genuinely thankful and appreciate it, because I understand that this video is criminally long and may not be the best structured script in the world. Let's move on to the bad things. Parkour still feels clunky and janky at times, with large eject ranges and extremely fast climbing souring my overall experience. Player control is still not given to us completely, and with the way the game targets landing spots or places to grab, I often find Edward not truly going where I want him to. I just don't understand why we had such a great system in the past, which was completely disregarded. I know that it was done due to people struggling, but that's more down to the lack of tutorialization from the games as opposed to players not wanting to learn the systems that we had. If every Assassin's Creed game started off with a mini tutorial that showed the general controls, as well as things like vaults and vaults to hang in the Kenway games, then players would have had a much more enjoyable experience because they knew what they were doing. Combat does get stale and repetitive after a couple of hours. It's still enjoyable, but it absolutely could and should have been a better experience. The lack of weapon variety is the primary contributor to that stillness. The fact that we can't even do a tool takedown on an enemy with 1 health is extremely disappointing, as tool finishes was one of the coolest things in the Kenway Saga combat system. I've also noticed that takedowns seem to be finicky and is inconsistent if you ground an enemy, and if you're surrounded by more enemies or your crew members in your way, you really can't take down the enemy. Getting stuck on small rocks and ledges makes navigating the terrain more annoying than it needs to be, while also slowing you down and causing unnecessary frustration. There's no way on earth that Edward should be able to easily slide over a table but get stuck on a 5-inch tall rock. Some cutscenes have also been changed in a minor way. While it may not seem like an issue, they do transform and change the emotions that are conveyed through the cutscene itself, while also making characters feel less like themselves and how they've always been depicted. One such example is when James Kidd reveals himself to actually be a woman, Mary Read. In the original cutscene, Edward casts a quick glance at her lips while his face is in shock, which conveys to the player that the act of her adorning her lips with blood is what immediately makes him realise that she was in fact a woman. In a Resync though, he just looks at her face and then makes a shocked face. While it may not seem like a huge change, it affects the subtleties, oh my gosh, I can't speak, subtleties, there we go. It affects the subtleties of the cutscene and his realisation, and this trend of changing cutscenes seems to be a thing throughout the game. I can't say how common it is, since I haven't finished the game, but it's enough to where I definitely prefer the original cutscenes as opposed to the remake. Another thing is that hanging enemies from trees is a phenomenal mechanic, but it just doesn't feel viable in 90% of situations. Edward takes too long to pull up an enemy, and you get caught most of the time, even if you have a smoke bomb. As well as this, not being able to drop to the ground is a big issue, because there are times in which you do want to get to floor level after hanging an enemy, but you have to wait a few seconds before you are able to do so, which sometimes means that enemies continue their routes and get to you. This means that you have to wait for them to turn around or for the route cycle to complete its rotation before you can slip past these guards. There absolutely should be a way to do the slower hang from tree level, while also giving us the option to do a faster hang which drops you down to ground level. I think that would add variety while also giving the player a choice between how fast they want to handle the enemies. Something as simple as adding a directional input while you're hanging the enemies can make us do the jump hang like in the original game. Enemy health bars. No, the health bar is not the issue that I'm going to mention. The health bars being linked to the tag above enemy heads when you observe them is the problem. If you're like me and you do want to turn off the health bars, you can't really do so because you lose access to the observe feature since the enemies do not have this tag above their head. Enemies also feel very inconsistent, which makes stealth and predicting enemy behavior feel a bit RNG at times. Sometimes you assassinate an enemy right next to another and they don't react, but you then assassinate someone and an enemy from 20 meters away with their back turned to you notices and alerts other enemies, which leads to you being hunted down. This was a huge issue when I played Valhalla, and I know people who also complain about the enemy AI in AC3, so I'm unsure why we still have this issue, because Shadows did not really have this problem. On the topic of Shadows, the UI and menus in Resynced feel dull, lifeless, and directly ripped from that game. I do understand that Black Flag Resynced is built on an earlier build of Shadows, but there still should be something to differentiate the two games. Navigating the menus can also feel annoying because getting to a certain thing is behind 2 or 3 other menus. Another problem is that when you're in the animus section or in the vault, pressing back or circle takes you right back to the game when sometimes all you want to do is go back to the page you were previously on. This means that you have to once again go back through 2 menus just to get to where you originally were. Another issue is the censorship of the female form in the game. We see this most evidently on things such as the mermaid figurehead for the jackdaw. While I personally don't really care about it, it does make me question why they felt the need to do so. As far as I know, this is a pirate game, and those types of figureheads were common in not only the pirate era, but also throughout history. Statues of the female and male form were extremely common and still visible around the world to this day. While I didn't play Odyssey, I do know that there was so much imagery of male phalluses on statues that there was even an article made ranking all of them. So why is it that the male nudity was fine to showcase while female nudity and the female form is not? The game's also a lot more vibrant and colourful, which should be a good thing. The problem is that it also feels like the game lacks the grittiness and griminess that the original game had, which makes a lot of characters feel much different than they did in the OG. Walking through Nassau with Thatch and Hornigold didn't feel as depressing as it did in the original game, despite the fact that we see sickness all over the island. As well as this, the orange filter in the game alters how some outfits look, and it's also just a bit too strong for my liking. So much so that I've installed a mod that eliminates it and replaces it with a much more natural look. In terms of the characters, Edward feels much more manipulative, but in the original game he seemed dangerous as well as manipulative. It detracts a bit from his character in my opinion. Another character that we've seen is James Kidd. She looks far more feminine in this game, which would kind of be a given, but it makes it a little harder to truly believe that no one suspected her of pretending to be a man. A silly little thing is that characters occasionally do this weird me character jumping up and down celebration during gameplay or cutscenes. We see this most clearly with Woods Rogers after we complete his shooting task, although a couple of other characters have also done it. I believe that we should have gotten some added functionality to our tools, and honestly, it feels like a bit of a miss. It would be really cool to have an upgrade for our berserk dart that kills enemies if you shoot them twice, just like in Unity, or for our sleep darts to be able to release a cloud that can sleep multiple enemies with one shot. Sometimes having to wait for a berserked enemy to die can kill some precious time in a stealth run, which means that you have to wait for the next rotation in enemy patrols. This may just be me, but not being able to hold R2 when aiming a smoke bomb just feels weird. Selecting tools also feels weird, and there's a horrible delay when shooting your pistols or darts, which can lead to you missing your initial shot and enemies being on high alert. We have to press the tool button twice in order to select the tool that we want to use, whereas in old games you pressed it once and then held R2 to aim it, in the case of smoke bombs, or to shoot instantly in the case of pistols and blow darts. Another issue that I have is that you have to constantly reselect the tool that you want to use, which kills fluidity and smoothness in my opinion. If you had a sleep dart selected and you aim and you stop aiming, Edward seems to forget what he wanted to use and we have to retoggle it just to use it again, which just doesn't feel good. Since we are talking about aiming the tools, I also believe that the berserk and sleep darts should have different reticles when scoped in. As someone who plays with the minimal HUD clutter, I find it difficult to know which of the 2 darts I'm going to shoot, because the game gives me no visual feedback, unlike when an enemy loses their hat to let you know that they're open for a takedown. And I have found myself putting an enemy to sleep when I want to make them go berserk instead. Since we're still talking about the tools, I'm also not the biggest fan that when you throw smoke bombs, it can also lead to enemies hunting you down. There are times in which you just want to obscure the vision of enemies without them leaving their post or changing their route, but now you suddenly have 2 to 3 enemies looking for you just because you're trying to be stealthy. For me personally, this has led to an avoidance of using smoke bombs just to the fact that I don't want to be hunted down for trying to be sneaky, because in my opinion, it kind of defeats the purpose. In Unity, there's a mod called ACU Fixes, which completely transformed the playing experience in a good way. And honestly, I don't know why the devs for Assassin's Creed don't implement some of these changes. For example, you can shoot darts in midair or drop a smoke below you while you're on an NSO or in midair. While it does sound like a minor thing, it completely alters the gameplay to a more fluid one in which you truly feel like an assassin. It doesn't make sense to me that we can't drop smoke bombs or shoot darts while simultaneously carrying out another action. To add to this, I'm surprised that there's no option to quick shoot a dart. The delay when having to aim in just slows down the experience and leads to a break in fluidity and smoothness. As you can tell, fluidity and smoothness are two very important things to me. In the abilities section, we should be able to press the pistol button to navigate through the pistol and the two dart types, which would allow us to select which ranged item we can quick shoot. I understand we have the rope dart and the pistols on quick shoot, but sometimes you just want to shoot an enemy with a berserk dart, stop them in their tracks and then run and assassinate them, which is just much more fluid than sprinting, standing still while shooting a rope dart and then waiting for the enemy to stumble to you before you can assassinate them. Now, let's move on to the ugly. First and foremost, this is the biggest thing in my opinion, remapping the controls. This is a complete nightmare, especially for those of us who like to emulate legacy controls. The fact that you also can't bind assassinate and attack to the same button is crazy to me, especially when it wasn't an issue in any previous titles. As someone who tries to emulate the classic controls as closely as possible, which many people also do, it's very, very annoying. I hate contextual actions, but if the button prompt says assassinate, then that's what the game should do, not attack the enemy with your sword. As well as this, there should be an option to press the interact bind to interact with something. Having to hold triangle every single time is just annoying. Another problem with this that I've noticed is that there are times in which you have to press triangle to interact, there's times where you have to hold triangle to interact. I get it, if you have the HUD on and all the button prompts, this is fine because you can see. But as someone who doesn't play with much HUD on, I don't know this. So there are times where I tap triangle, nothing happens, or I hold triangle and nothing happens. Another problem is the addition of toggle sprint. This is a massive issue which affects multiple things, the biggest victims being, you guess it, fluidity and smoothness. There's a lot more to it and my post is already long enough, so please just watch the video from Leo K that I'll link in the description down below. The removal of the puppeteering and high profile low profile system is horrible. It affects many more titles than Black Flag, but I thought that the devs would have learned and brought this back. Not being able to tell the game what type of assassination that you'd like to carry out is not only a loss for player control, but once again add some RNG to your runs because you don't know if you'll do a fast animation or be stuck in a longer one, which can and has led to enemies seeing you. We saw this issue most clearly in some of the footage we saw prior to launch, where we see Edward crouch assassinate an enemy but then stand up and get seen by another. The lack of animation variety is absolutely unacceptable. This issue is evident in every single aspect of the game. Naval combat, open combat and takedowns, assassinations, parkour, open world traversal, NPC interactions in the form of conversation and voice lines, enemy animations, exploration, etc, etc. This is the main issue with combat. It got extremely boring even prior to launch because we've seen the exact same animations over and over and over again during both combat and stealth sections. There's no reason at all as to why we only have one animation for takedowns, one animation for sweeps, one for kicks, one for rope dart pulls, gun kata, cover assassinations or crouch assassinations. If they did insist on giving us such a rigid combat system, they should have given us more animations. There are no excuses at all. On the topic of crouch assassinations, there is a reason why I sound a bit iffy when I say this. This is because we don't have actual crouch assassination animations, and not only that, there's only one. There's no reason as to why Edward stands up completely to assassinate an enemy when we initiate the action while we're crouched. Not only does it ruin the immersion and make no sense at all, it can lead to you being seen, which can disrupt your runs. As well as this, we had beautiful crouch animations in Shadows, where Nawe would sweep the enemy's feet from under them, then assassinate them as they landed on the ground. So that goes to prove that it's not an engine limitation, which is a very common defense, I should say, that I hear people regurgitate over and over again whenever I bring up any form of criticisms. Camera cuts on double assassinations. I said this low and slow because there's not really anything else to say about it. I will say, for anyone interested, I will leave a link to a mod that I found yesterday in which it completely removes the camera cuts. And this truly leads me to believe, did the devs really want to keep them in the game? Were they not able to? Was it a quote-unquote engine limitation or what? Because if a modder can do this and release it one day after the game came out, there's no way that the devs with a year, 2, 3, 4 years of dev time have not been able to do this. Another problem to me is the sound effects and the visual effects when doing chain takedowns. These are really bad, and there's no reason as to why we shouldn't have a toggle for it. Hearing cannon fire and seeing a dust cloud when you do the chain takedown absolutely ruins the experience for me. And while cannon fire makes sense in a pirate themed game, it doesn't make sense when you hear it when you're not even on the ship. The non-existence of hidden blade combat is something that has constantly been argued, defended, protested, and everything under the sun. Since we've not seen it in the game, months before launch, everyone's been complaining about it. Some people hate it, some people love it. But one thing that we can all agree on is that it added much needed variety to the game. As well as this, unarmed combat and weapon pickups are also gone from the game. This, in my opinion, is something completely inexcusable. I had no issue with it being gone in the games prior to this, but the fact that the original game had it, and this game is a quote-unquote faithful and honourable remake, that's where the problem is. The lack of weapon variety also feels the combat leading stale. The 3 sword types don't really have any differences in terms of range or damage output, which makes it feel like you're using the same weapon unless you're spamming heavy attacks. And as we know, this game combat system is not really built for spamming attacks. You should just use a couple light attacks to keep the enemies in an animation stagger, use a sweep or a kick to make them vulnerable for a takedown, and then initiate a takedown. This issue, paired with the lack of animation variety, leads to a combat system that looks great but lacks actual depth. The addition of hidden blade combat, unarmed combat and weapon pickups would add much needed variety, while also making the lack of animations feel less prominent than it currently does. Because even if we only have 1 or 2 animations for each combat type, because there are more combat types, we see more overall animations. You with me? Another issue I ran into is that I was locked into a quest that I'd never selected, and I had to load up an earlier save in order to escape this issue. What had happened is that I fast travelled to Salt Key Bank in order to access a harpooning activity, but I was locked into the intro for the Lucy Baldwin mission, despite the fact that I never even highlighted or initiated it. I was also boxed into a certain area unable to pilot my ship, which led to me having to load an earlier save to get past this. Tailing missions. What they've done is absolutely disgraceful, and while I understand that people didn't like how many of them we had, no one was truly complaining about the difficulty of them or being caught. After all, they weren't really difficult to do, and if you got caught, you should have been punished for it by failing the mission. The issue is that they didn't reduce the number of them, but they completely changed the mission structure to one that directly contradicts and invalidates the mission type. I don't know why Ubisoft are so scared of punishing the player for messing up, which is a problem that we see throughout the evolution of parkour as the series goes on, from a system in which we had complete control to one where the game makes a move based on contextual things as opposed to just doing what we ask it to. All you have to do is take a look at the RPG games. You go from having to path your route and choose specific areas to climb up in the previous games to now being able to climb up a freaking mountain. Sorry for getting sidetracked, but it genuinely blows my mind that it's borderline impossible, if not completely impossible, to now fail a tailing mission. There's no risk or challenge to them at all, which is extremely disappointing. And as someone who absolutely loved them in the previous game, I now find myself abhorring these missions. Having our ship be capped at a certain speed so that we don't get closer to enemy ships is also a joke, and they genuinely might as well have just given us a cutscene because it feels like player input isn't even necessary. Performance on the solid PC was also abysmal after getting to Havana. For myself, I have an i7-13700K, a 4070 Super and 32GB of DDR RAM, and I was playing at the recommended settings for 1440p 60fps gameplay. The problem is that once I got to Havana, I was having constant stuttering and frame drops, but it didn't happen when I was at sea. My FPS would go from the mid 70s and 80s down to the mid 40s. Once I got to Nassau, it was even worse, with the lowest FPS being in the mid 20s, at which point my game crashed on me. I understand that many others were affected by this too, many of whom had had better or similar computer hardware, and that lowering settings actually led to worse performance. Using keyboard and mouse as an input caused even worse issues, to the point where I couldn't even move due to how low the FPS was. I eventually saw people post a fix, and it meant that I've had to disable hyperthreading on my CPU, because that's the only thing that allows me to play with a constant frame rate of 70 to 80 FPS with no issues. So, as of patch update 1.0.4, this problem has now returned. I still have hyperthreading turned off, I've not changed it, But for some reason, once I get to Havana or Nassau, or actually anywhere now, even in Kingston, my FPS even dips down to 1 or 2. I'll attach a clip of this down at the very end of this video. Back to where I was before. Other people also had to disable the equals on their CPU, either through third-party software or in Task Manager, which meant that every time they loaded up the game, they had to do this. So let's move on to the neutral. So these are things that I'm not too fussed about. It would be good to have, but I'm not too worried about whether we get them or not. So the first thing is a wider selection of pets. Giving us more pets or even allowing multiple pets on the ships would be nice to have. I also understand that our pets go to the captain cabin when we're not on the ship, but it would be nice to also have them roaming around the ship or out on the docks waiting for us to return. It will just kind of make it feel like it's your own cat waiting for you, do you know what I mean? Having crazy microtransaction packs also doesn't look good in the game. I personally have nothing against them because I've spent more than enough money in Valorant and COD, but skins should be similar to the game theme and art direction in order to allow deeper immersion in the game. Selling 60 to 70% of grounded skins and 30 to 40% wacky skins would be a good balance in my opinion, because this accommodates players who want either type of skins. The fact that we also had 4 if you include the deluxe edition, bundles on launch day is not a great sign at all. However, they are relatively out of the way, so it's not a big problem to me. Allowing us to single wield swords would also be a fun gameplay change that could give us more of a challenge based on the fact that Edward only has one sword to be both offensive and defensive with. It would also be nice to be able to knock out enemies so that we can dispatch them in a non-lethal method. Noisemaker or firecracker darts would be good for a method in which we don't directly interact with the enemy. This dart would be useful for grouping enemies together or for moving them from their position so that we can sneak past, similar to the cherry bomb in Unity or the bell in Shadows. A little side note, for those of you who may not know how to do this, all you have to do is shoot a berserk or sleep dart a bit away from an enemy and they'll react to the noise cue, turn away, and they'll go investigate it. For me personally, this has helped me be a bit more stealthy because the enemies just move out of the way for me and I don't need to directly interact with them. So until we do or don't get out of these dart types that I have mentioned, this is a good trick to know. Another problem I found is that there are issues with trees in swamp areas. The branches are slightly too high so that we can't run up the tree, but the issue is that the trees themselves have branches that link together to form a parkour route. You can't climb up any of the trees, and I was only able to animation cancel into one tree, with the rest of them having me phase through the branch. Maybe they're not designed for tree parkour, but they look like they are, which is extremely confusing. Not only that, but I also found on that a lot of these trees, they have stumps that can be run onto. The problem is that you get stuck when you're trying to climb up onto them from the side. You can only climb onto them directly from in front. On the top of having to be directly in front of something, chests and other items are a hassle to open and collect. Large boxes can only be opened from in front, but due to their design, you sometimes don't know if you are in front or behind them. As someone who plays without HUD elements, it makes it very confusing when I can't open a box even though it feels like I should be able to. Here are my final thoughts. All in all, I am impressed by Black Flag Resynced in some aspects, but I'm disappointed in quite a few of them. I find that the issues I thought would be a problem are an issue, but I've also found myself pleasantly surprised by some things that I thought would be a problem, but they're kind of something that I can look past, which is something I couldn't do in the RPG games. There are things that have also really impressed me, and I find myself thoroughly enjoying every moment of them. As you can tell, I'm much more of a gameplay oriented player, so I'm not really mentioning too much about the story. Not only because I haven't played the game much, but also due to the fact that if a game plays well, I personally don't care too much about the narrative. Since it is a remake of Black Flag though, I know that the overall story is great, and for me personally, that's good enough. I don't think that this game is overall worse or better than the original game, which is something that I had previously thought prior to release. The high points for the game are truly high, but the low points are also very low in my opinion. So for me, this game is one of extremes. The good things are really good, the bad things are really bad. I rate the game a solid 8 out of 10, and I would recommend it to someone even if they've played the original, but also give them the heads up that, in my opinion, the naval aspect is by far the strongest point of the game, while the animations and overall variety in the game is the lowest. I think that just like the original game, the pirate fantasy seems to take priority of the assassin aspect, which to me is a bit odd in a game titled Assassin's Creed, but I know it's also appealing to other players. It's definitely the most assassiny and enjoyable game in the franchise since Syndicate, but I'm unsure as to how much of that success boils down to new mechanics and features versus the game being a remake of a game in an era where assassin fantasy was still the core focus of the game. Is this game a success due to the fact that it's just a Black Flag remake, or is the Black Flag storyline something that boosted an already great gameplay experience? That's for you to decide.